Imagine being just 10 years old, waking up each day, not to the warmth of family or the scent of breakfast, but to the sting of shouted insults and the scrape of rough broom bristles on your hands while scrubbing a floor you don't even sleep on. That was Kamiko's world, a world where being born into poverty wasn't her fault, but somehow always felt like her punishment. Before she ever had the chance to play with dolls or dream of a birthday cake, Kamiko learned the art of silence because silence was safer than speaking. She lived in a forgotten part of the village tucked behind the rows of cement block houses in a tiny weathered hut, where the only affection she knew came from the chirping birds outside her window. Kamiko's parents weren't the kind you see in fairy tales. Her father, Felix, was emotionally absent, more interested in palm wine and gossip than the well-being of his child. Her stepmother, Amaka, was worse, a bitter woman who treated Kamiko like unwanted property, feeding her once a day, beating her for mistakes she didn't make, and constantly calling her names like useless child and witch's gift. Kamiko couldn't remember the last time she had been hugged or even spoken to kindly. And here's the reality. Too many children across the world live through these invisible traumas, the kind that don't leave bruises on their bodies, but leave lifelong scars on their hearts. According to UNICEF, millions of children are subjected to emotional neglect, verbal abuse, and domestic labor under the very roofs meant to protect them. Kamiko's life reflected this grim truth. Every day was a repetition of misery, yet she carried a quiet strength inside her, a hope that someday someone might see her, not as a burden, but as a girl with a name and a story worth knowing. That hope flickered when one afternoon she overheard her father and stepmother whispering to a couple in a large black SUV parked outside their compound. Kamiko peeked through the curtains and saw a man and woman dressed in expensive clothes talking in low voices. She couldn't hear much, but one word kept echoing. Sell, sell, sell. Her heart pounded. Amaka called her outside, smiling falsely, which was already alarming, and told her to pack her few belongings because she was going to help a big family in the city. Kamiko tried to protest, asking why she couldn't stay or go to school like the others. But Amaka slapped her across the face, and Felix simply looked away as if she didn't exist. Kamiko clutched her worn-out sandals and a plastic bag containing her only dress and was pushed into the back seat of the car like luggage, not like a child. Let's pause here because this moment, while dramatized, represents a horrifying reality in many parts of the world where children are sold into domestic servitude under the pretense of giving them a better life. The International Labor Organization reports that tens of millions of children work as domestic servants, often unpaid, unprotected, and unheard, and the people responsible aren't always strangers. Sometimes they are family. Kamiko sat in the back seat staring at the dust trail of her village, vanishing behind her, wondering if she would ever be seen again, heard again, loved again. The couple in the front said very little. The man occasionally adjusted the AC. The woman filed her nails and didn't even glance back. When Kamiko asked if she could call home once they arrived in the city, Kamiko expected lights and magic, but what she found was a mansion surrounded by tall gates and colder hearts. She was led to a small servant's quarters and given a bucket and sponge. No one introduced themselves. No one asked her name. She was simply told, "You'll be caring for the old woman upstairs. Don't talk unless spoken to, and don't ever leave this house." Kamiko spent her first night curled on a thin mat, staring at the ceiling and wondering what her mother would have said if she were still alive. She didn't know much about her birth mother, only that she had died when Kamiko was little, and the few memories she had left were warm ones, a lullaby, a kiss on the forehead, the sound of humming while cooking that night. Kamiko hummed to herself softly, trying to summon that memory, trying to hold on to something that still felt like love. In the morning, she was led to the second floor of the mansion where she met Mama Gloria, an eerie, elderly woman with silver hair, sunken cheeks, and eyes that barely blinked. She was propped in a wheelchair in a sunlit room that felt more like a cage than a bedroom. Kamiko was told she used to be important once, but now she was just something to be kept quiet, something to be forgotten. Kamiko didn't know why, but she felt drawn to Mama Gloria, not out of duty but out of instinct, and over the next few days, while the rest of the house ignored the old woman, Kamiko would sit beside her, brush her hair, talk to her, and even sing her lullabies just like the ones she remembered from her own mother. and something miraculous began to happen. Mama Gloria started blinking more, then smiling, then laughing. Her voice returned in whispers, then words, and Kamiko felt something she had never felt before. Purpose in healing someone else, she was healing herself too. In the weeks that followed, Kamiko's presence in the mansion became a quiet miracle. Not the kind that makes headlines, but the kind that breathes life into forgotten corners of the world every morning. She brought tea to Mama. Gloria brushed her hair, helped her stretch her limbs, and spoke to her, not like a duty, but like a granddaughter. Even though Kamiko didn't know it yet, their bond was already rewriting fate. The other members of the household barely noticed the change, and when they did, they brushed it off as coincidence. The woman of the house, Vanessa, made sure Kamiko knew her place. She barked orders, rolled her eyes, and made casual threats. Like, if I ever catch you near the family dining room, you'll be back on the street by morning. Kamiko endured it all with quiet resilience because even though her body was tired, her spirit had begun to stir every evening. She would retreat to her tiny room and sketch in secret with a stub of pencil and the back of used paper napkins she'd found in the kitchen. She didn't know why, but drawing Mama Gloria's eyes, her smile, her chair made her feel like she was holding on to something permanent, something safe. One evening, while dusting the bookshelf in Mama Gloria's room, Kamiko discovered an old photo album buried beneath stacks of untouched books and forgotten awards. Curiosity took over, and she flipped it open. The pages were faded, but the faces were familiar. There was Mama Gloria standing tall in front of a massive building, a sign above her that read, Gloria Holdings Lanhanawardi. She wore a sharp suit, her hair pulled back. Her smile proud. Beside her were two younger men, one with kind eyes, the other with a forced grin. Kamiko traced the lines on the photo and paused on one. In particular, a little girl, no more than 3 years old in a frilly dress, standing beside the man. With kind eyes, Kamiko's heart skipped. She looked familiar, not in the way people in old photos often do, but in the way mirrors do. That little girl looked like her same nose, same eyes, even the same birthmark on her collarbone. She looked again at Mama Gloria, who had fallen asleep, and suddenly questions began screaming in Kamiko's mind. Who am I really? What happened to this family? Why do I look like the child in this album? She slipped the photo into her pocket, and from that day forward began listening more carefully to the whispers around the house, in the dining room, behind the stairwell, in the garden where Vanessa often made phone calls. Kamiko learned that Mama Gloria had once been the CEO of a massive company, but after a mysterious illness, she had been declared unfit to lead. Her youngest son, Henry, had taken over the business with his wife, Vanessa, and they had quickly shifted all power into their own hands, silencing Gloria and locking her in her room under the pretense of care. Kamiko also learned that Gloria had once had another son, Daniel, the one in the photo with the kind eyes, but he had died in a tragic car accident along with his wife, Clara, after their car plunged into a river during a business trip. What shocked Kamiko most was the fact that their child was never found. Everyone assumed she had drowned too, but no body was recovered. The child had vanished. The moment she heard that detail, Kamiko's hands began to shake. And this is where we pause for reflection, because what Kamiko stumbled upon wasn't just a twist of fate. It was a common truth hidden in families all over the world. Secrets that are buried to protect power, legacies rewritten to benefit the greedy, and children lost in the silence of shame and wealth. Real-life stories echo this every day in some communities. Inheritance fraud leads to manipulation, gaslighting, and even the erasure of rightful heirs. A study by the World Bank reports that in developing countries, over 30% of estate battles involve forged documents, lost heirs, or concealed relatives, especially when the heirs are female or vulnerable. Kamiko didn't know legal terms, but she knew what she felt. What she felt was that something about her life was more than just coincidence. She began to gently ask Mama Gloria questions, sometimes pretending to be curious, sometimes pretending to be playful. One day, she showed her the photo of the little girl and asked, "Do you remember her?" Mama Gloria's hands trembled as she reached for the photo. Tears welled in her eyes. She whispered her name, Kamiko. Kamiko stared, her chest pounding. She asked softly, "Do you think I could be her?" Mama Gloria looked at her for a long moment, then lifted the edge of Kamiko's sleeve, revealing the birthmark. She gasped, then wept, holding Kamiko like something she had been waiting to touch for years. That moment didn't answer everything, but it awakened a determination in Mama Gloria, who began demanding to be wheeled around the house again, began requesting meetings with lawyers, began regaining not just her voice, but her power in the weeks that followed. A discreet DNA test was arranged behind Henry and Vanessa's back. Results arrived sealed and quiet, and when Mama Gloria opened them, her hands shook but her eyes gleamed. She looked at Kamiko and said, "My child, my granddaughter, my miracle." The morning that followed was unlike any other for the first time in years. The once muted corridors of the mansion echoed with strength instead of silence. Mama Gloria sat upright in her wheelchair, wearing a navy blue shawl, and the quiet steel of a woman who had been denied too long by noon. She had summoned the board of directors of Gloria Holdings Lanornamasin to her private study with her granddaughter Kamiko. Standing beside her, her voice shook at first but then rose with the clarity of thunder as she declared that she had never stepped down from her position, only been silenced by those who claimed to protect her. She produced documents, affidavits, medical reports, and at the end of the table, she laid down the DNA results confirming that Kamiko was the rightful heir to the business empire. The room fell into stunned silence until a slow, sarcastic clap broke it. Henry stepped forward, arms crossed with a smug smile on his face. "What is this? Some fairy tale resurrection?" he scoffed. "Everyone knows. You've been unwell, Mother. No one will believe this." Vanessa stood behind him, eyes narrow, arms folded. "This girl was a servant 2 weeks ago now. You want us to believe? She's your granddaughter. You're losing your mind, Mother." But Mama Gloria didn't flinch. She handed the DNA report to the head of the board, who confirmed the results in front of everyone. Gasps rippled across the room. This wasn't a movie. This was a reckoning. The truth no longer had to hide. Henry tried to argue, claiming forgery manipulation, but the board had seen enough over the years. They had watched Henry bleed the company's funds, throw lavish parties, approve reckless mergers, and ignore employee welfare under his leadership. Profits had dropped. Morale had tanked, clients had walked away, and yet none had dared speak until now. Now the matriarch had returned and the rightful heir had been found. Mama Gloria turned to Henry with eyes that burned not just with anger but justice and said, "You took my silence as weakness. You used my illness as an excuse to steal from your own family. You turned this house into a prison, but I'm done being quiet." Henry's voice trembled. "You wouldn't dare." Her eyes narrowed. "Try me." The board voted on the spot, unanimously stripping Henry of all authority, freezing his shares and launching an audit into every decision made during his reign. Vanessa tried to protest but was reminded that she had no official stake in the company. She was merely an accessory to a lie. They were both escorted out of the building, their faces flushed with shame. Cameras captured the moment as the security gate closed behind them, and while their downfall wasn't loud, it was permanent. Now let's pause and reflect, because this isn't just a fictional power play. This mirrors real-life scenarios across the globe. In corporate families across generations, manipulation of elderly patriarchs and matriarchs is shockingly common. Forbes reported in a 2021 study that over 60% of family-owned businesses globally suffer from internal fraud and betrayal due to lack of succession clarity, especially when a family member becomes ill or incapacitated. Instead of uniting to support them, others circle, like vultures waiting to strike. And what makes Kamiko's case so powerful is that her return wasn't driven by revenge, it was driven by rediscovery. She didn't know her inheritance, she only knew her truth. And sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. In the days that followed, Mama Gloria began training Kamiko not as a child, not as a symbol, but as a leader. She enrolled her in the finest private school, hired tutors, and brought in mentors from every department to help her understand the company's operations. Kamiko soaked it all in her mind, hungry, her heart open. She walked into boardrooms with wide eyes and left with bold questions. Her curiosity became her compass, her compassion her foundation. Employees who had once been afraid to speak now greeted her with respect, not because of her name, but because of her presence. She had seen suffering, she had lived through the loss of identity and dignity, and she hadn't let it make her cruel. Instead, it made her careful but courageous. Mama Gloria watched with pride as Kamiko evolved from a timid girl who had once swept the marble floors, into a young woman who walked those same halls like she belonged. And that transformation wasn't made of magic. It was made of memory, resilience, and choice. Real-life examples abound of such quiet yet powerful transformations. Consider the case of Saru Jairaman, an American labor rights advocate who started as a daughter of immigrants working in restaurants today. She leads one of the most influential restaurant labor movements in the world because experience, when combined with empathy, is a force that can move mountains. One evening, Kamiko stood at the balcony of her family's estate looking over the city lights. Beside her, Mama Gloria whispered, "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" Kamiko turned. What she heard next stayed with her forever. "I see the proof that love, even when forgotten, can still find its way back home." Despite the polished marble floors of the estate, the glimmer of chandeliers, and the quiet hum of boardrooms, Kamiko knew that closure did not live in luxury. It lived back in the dust of the village, where she had once been sold like a broom, where her name had been spat like poison, and her dignity dragged across mud and silence. And so one Saturday afternoon, dressed not in opulence but in calm authority, Kamiko stood beside Mama Gloria as their sleek black car slowed to a stop outside the same rusted gate of her childhood home. The air was thick, not just with heat but with memory. Behind that gate sat Felix, her father, or rather the man who had once called himself that, and beside him still, bitter and tight-lipped, was Amaka, her stepmother, both of them older but no wiser. Amaka squinted through the gate as if unsure if what she saw was real, her voice sharp as ever. "What do you want? Now, haven't you caused enough disgrace?" Kamiko stepped out of the car, not with rage but with resolution. "I came to return something you lost your right to speak about me." The villagers began to gather, whispers circling like flies around a flame. For years, these people had watched Kamiko suffer, had looked away, had offered empty prayers and tight smiles, and now they watched her emerge from a car they'd only seen in movies, her posture firm, her eyes unafraid. Mama Gloria was helped out, slowly followed by two guards and a local lawyer, who opened a folder and began reading aloud a formal statement, declaring that Kamiko was the biological granddaughter of Gloria Adiemi, legal heir to her estate business and properties, including the family mansion and company shares. Felix stumbled backward as if the words themselves had slapped him. Amaka shrieked, "Nonsense, this is a lie, she's a witch." She was left in the forest for a reason. Gloria stepped forward, cane in hand, voice clear and sharp. "Kamiko is not a witch. She is my granddaughter, and you are a disgrace," Felix muttered. "I only did what was best." Gloria turned to him then, with sadness, not anger. "You sold your own child for money. She was worth more than anything you've ever owned. You don't get to rewrite history just because you're ashamed of your role in it." Kamiko's heart raced, but she stood steady. She didn't need revenge, she needed recognition. The lawyer handed Amaka and Felix an envelope. Inside was a check enough to silence any future claim, but not enough to erase the pain, and a legal document barring them from ever contacting Kamiko again or attempting to exploit her identity for gain. Amaka tried to argue, but villagers began murmuring loudly. Words like shameful and wicked woman began bubbling up from the crowd. For years, they had seen Kamiko work, while other children played, seen her bruises, seen her hunger, and now the reckoning had arrived. Kamiko turned to the villagers, not to scold but to speak. She said, "I am not here to prove anything. I'm not here for vengeance. I am here to say that no child should be treated the way I was not in this village. Not anywhere." A few heads lowered, a few eyes filled with tears. Mama Gloria nodded beside her, proud and calm, and for the first time Kamiko felt something break inside her. Not pain, but release, like the ropes of shame had been cut, and all that was left was truth. The crowd slowly applauded, not wildly, but slowly, respectfully. It wasn't celebration, it was acknowledgement. A moment when the silence of injustice was finally replaced by the sound of accountability as they drove away from the village. Kamiko looked out the window one last time, not with longing, but with clarity, because healing isn't always soft. Sometimes it walks straight into the room where it was hurt and speaks the truth anyway. Real-life stories mirror this kind of confrontation. Consider the journey of Maya Moore, the WNBA star who left her basketball career to fight for the wrongful imprisonment of Jonathan Irons eventually. helping to overturn his conviction and later marrying him. That wasn't just justice, that was a woman using her voice to right a wrong born from silence. Like Kamiko, Maya didn't just move on, she went back and pulled the root. Kamiko returned to the mansion that night, lighter, stronger, and with a sense of peace she had never known before. She no longer had to carry the weight of her past in secret. She had faced it not as the powerless girl they abandoned, but as the woman they could no longer ignore. In the months that followed, Kamiko blossomed not into something new, but into who she had always been meant to become. Her transformation wasn't about makeup or money or mansions. It was about truth reclaiming its place at the center of her life. For the first time, she was addressed not as servant or orphan, but as Kamiko Adeyemi, heiress, granddaughter, future leader. And every time someone said her name with respect, it was like the syllables helped stitch her soul back together. She no longer slept in tiny corners, but in her own room filled with books and a light and quiet pride. Mama Gloria continued to guide her, not with control, but with care. She introduced Kamiko to her network, to women in leadership, to finance mentors, to advocates for child rights, and together they launched an initiative Kamiko named Home First, a foundation that provided shelter, education, and rehabilitation for children who had been trafficked, abandoned, or emotionally abused. What began as a small pilot project turned into a national movement. They opened their first shelter 2 towns over, then another and another. Kamiko would visit the children, often not to inspect but to listen. She would kneel in front of scared little girls and boys and tell them, "I know what it's like to feel invisible, but you are not alone. You are seen. You are wanted." And those words, spoken by someone who had once scrubbed marble floors in silence, meant more than gold. One little girl once asked her, "Are you a princess?" Kamiko smiled and said, "No, I'm just someone who decided I was worth more than the pain others gave me." And that's the heart of the story, because in a world that often defines people by the cruelty done to them, Kamiko rewrote her story not by erasing the pain, but by elevating it, turning it into power, into purpose, into protection for others. One evening during a gala event honoring the launch of the fourth Home First shelter, Kamiko gave a speech in front of dignitaries, leaders, and the very board members who had once questioned her place. She said, "I was once sold for the price of a new handbag. Today I fund schools, hospitals, and homes for children who were told they didn't matter. We cannot control where our stories begin, but we can absolutely decide where they go next." She looked toward the crowd and added, "I am not powerful because I was found. I am powerful because I chose to rise." And the room erupted, not with polite applause, but with raw, heartfelt admiration, because they weren't just clapping for success. They were clapping for survival, for the courage to stand in the ashes and build again. With bare hands and a stubborn heart, as Kamiko returned to her seat, Mama Gloria reached over and whispered, "Your parents would be proud." Kamiko looked at her and said quietly, "I hope they see me and know that I never forgot their love, even when the world tried to hide it." And that's how the story closes. Not with revenge, not with romance, but with restoration. A girl who had been left to fade into silence found her voice. A girl who was treated like property claimed her legacy and then used it not to build walls, but to open doors in a world where so many children are still sold, lied to, abandoned, or abused. Kamiko's story reminds us that one act of kindness, one thread of truth, one person who refuses to stay broken can change everything. This isn't just fiction, it's a mirror held up to a world full of lost Kamikos. And maybe, just maybe, it's a blueprint for how we bring them home one by one with truth, dignity, and love.